Hello, possibility seekers. We're back, and I'm super excited to have an awesome woman on. Not that anybody's less awesome than others, but I have to tell you, Kelly Nagel is one of my faves. Let me tell you a little bit about Kelly. First and foremost, Kelly is a mother, a wife, a daughter, and a friend. And I really enjoy every moment I get to spend with her. She's genuine, approachable, smart, and oh, such a great advocate for women and people. She's currently taking a career pause after many successful years leading various technology organizations. Her career has been centered around the IT industry for nearly 30 years, which is how we met. And Kelly has worked her way up from sales rep to regional president of the global leader in professional audio technology. Mentorship has been a huge instrumental part in getting her to where she is today, instilling in Kelly a strong belief in the importance of offering that same support to others. While at Jabra, she was part of the global leadership team promoting a culture that supports and empowers employees through a combination of formal and informal mentorship programs. She also served on their executive DEI committee and led the Women's Employee Resource Group. Kelly recently became on part of the advisory board member with the WIT Network, promoting the advancement of women in technology. Kelly believes it's vitally important to connect, empower, and inspire women to find their career success. Each and every one of us deserves to have someone in our professional sphere who believes in us a little bit more than we believe in ourselves. That's what mentorship is all about to her. Please join me in a huge welcome for my friend, Kelly Nagel.
Hello, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
It's great. It's awesome. We really will so enjoy hearing a different perspective from a corporate America female. Oh my God, what a
Ex corporate
concept.
America female, ex
That's
corporate
a,
America.
that's a, well, you know what? I think sometimes it's in our blood, So, your experience in corporate America, not being your authentic self, we talked about how sometimes that's difficult. And I wanted you to kind of unpack how that showed up for you and what kinds of emotions you had around that.
Yeah, it's something I hear from so many women that we feel we can't be ourselves. We have to be, we're told to be one of the boys, one of the men's club. If we want to fit in, we have to act more like our male counterparts, and especially within the technology industry where there is, you might be an only woman at the table, you might be one of two or three, but it is not an equal 50-50, at least not in my experience. So, you show up, you want to be your authentic self, but sometimes you're told you have to speak deeper, you need to talk slower, you need to go and be on the golf course, you need to talk sports. And those are things that, I want to be me. So I would, when I first worked in the field, I had such great mentors, sponsors, and bosses who said, you don't have to be that person. You can be yourself. And that's why we appreciate you and we are championing you for these leadership positions because we see you as an authentic leader who can help so many on the journey. So I had great leaderships. And as you go up the ladder, sometimes you tend to forget what got you there and the great advice that people told you to be yourself because you felt like maybe you didn't fit in, especially with less allies at the table. So I always say, I'm going to be 55 this year. At 55, I'm the only me I'm going to be, and I don't want to be anybody else. And I want to be my authentic self. And I want to show others that you can be successful and be your authentic self and not have to compromise who you are, your core beliefs and values. And Corrine Sharp, who's a great friend and ally, she said, go somewhere where you're celebrated, not tolerated. And that's my advice to so many because honestly, if you don't feel that you're celebrated and you're heard and you're contributing, then what are we doing there? Why are you there?
Exactly. Exactly. Well, I'm kind of happy that you had those experiences early in your career. I did not. I had quite the opposite, and my male bosses were terribly unsupportive. I was tolerated, not celebrated, for sure. Which is one of the reasons I wrote the book and why we're here today. So maybe there's good in all of that.
For those of you who haven't read Monique's book, please go run, grab it because it reminds you. We're constantly learning, we're constantly evolving and becoming the best version of ourselves. And your book is a great reminder of how to embrace that authentic you, and to have the good conversation in your head. It's like you're talking to your best friend versus your enemy, and the stories that we tell ourselves change that narrative and change that story.
Thank you. That's very kind of you. I really appreciate that. When we were talking last, we were talking about, not having time to breathe and think. The constantly constantly jumping from one thing to the other. You were telling me about the walking your dog but multitasking, and then, just try to do 14 things at one time. And how and when did you realize you were a bit overscheduled and then not being fully present? And what did you do about that? Because it's a tough one.
Yeah, it's a good. It really in the last year or two, certainly before the pandemic. I think I told people I caused the pandemic. By the way, because on New Year's, my New Year's resolution, we're sitting in the Outer Banks with dear friends of ours in this beautiful house and overlooking the water. And I said to my husband, what my New Year's wish is? And he said, what? I'm like, that I don't have to travel as much. I don't have to get on a plane all the time. I don't feel like I'm constantly running. And I was actually in Denmark. I was actually in Sweden. I had taken a day trip because I was there, and I was on my way back. So I managed to come back before, and it was right around the end of February. Yeah, but I told my husband, I think I may have caused the pandemic.
I wanted so badly to sit on my butt on my sofa and not go anywhere that this is what.
Yes, I said that. I said I wanted so much to not jump on a plane and having to just rush from one thing to another and trying to fit in as an only child. My mother's a widow, and helping her, and it was in having a young son who was just getting started in his journey post high school, and it when I slowed down, I realized that I wanted to enjoy things. And so we bought a lake house in the Finger Lakes during the pandemic. And someone actually said to me, "You know what, Kelly, you are a different person here." And I said, "Wow, that's telling," because I associated my home with my work because I work from home a lot. Started traveling again in the post last 2 years. But when I was at our lake house, I was relaxed, I was happy, I was joyful. I would, listen to the birds. I would watch the eagles that are coming in and the osprey getting their breakfast in the morning. I would sit on the porch and watch the sunrise. And it slowed me down. And it was then that I realized I need a better balance because I can't continue on the way I am.
Yeah, tell us what that looked like. What would be like a typical day in the life of, you were so just people listening here or watching, understand the level at which Kelly rose to. She was president of Jabra, North America. That is a huge job. So I want you to bring the listener to your world, to your day. The day in the life of Kelly Nagel looks crazy. But tell us about it, because everybody's always like, "I'm busy." And I go, "You know what? I get that." Some people I really don't get because I don't know what they do all day. But that's another conversation for a different day. You legitimately had your hair on fire. I want you to kind of go let us appreciate what you did.
During the pandemic, when I wasn't traveling to Denmark once a month, so I would fly to Copenhagen once a month. So I'd be in Copenhagen once a month for 4 or 5 days. I'd be in our little their little Massachusetts office once a month, and then I'd be somewhere else. I'd probably be home maybe 1 week a month at the most. So a day in the life of it's governance week, and I'm up at 3 in the morning, camera ready on calls with the global management team, talking through. That was 3 days in a row of getting up at dark 30, I like to call it. So my
Oh,
day
it's
would
4:30.
so I would start, on calls from 3 or 4 in the morning, and those would end at about 11 or 12 Eastern time. And then I would go into my normal day where, I was leading an organization of over 150 people in North America, leading the enterprise business, and also, being in charge of culture and all things employees in North America. So there was over 500 employees in North America between the consumer, the enterprise, and the retail and online team. So it was quite a big group that we were responsible for driving inclusion, driving employee resources groups within the company, not only for the women at GN, but also for Pride and Black at GN. So I was a sponsor of all of those employee resource groups. So, driving employee morale, getting the teams together, being in the office to promote, we call them our connection days. So that would be like once a week, we would have everyone come in for a lunch or a breakfast just so they can connect post pandemic because it was a little bit different within the schedule. So, yeah, I was preparing for board meetings, global management team meetings, meeting customers, partners, alliance vendors such as Microsoft and Zoom, and it was nonstop from sometimes, like I said, dark 30 until 6, 7, 8 o'clock, dark night. Yeah, so that was the world that I lived in, and then my thank goodness my husband, his business actually took a downturn in the pandemic, so he was great in supporting me. He works in the travel industry, so he started creating bread. So he became a baker and was making sourdough bread and bagels and soup. So every day he'd be like, I would not even have a break for lunch. So he'd be like texting me, "Do you want lunch?" I'm like, "Yes, please." So he'd bring it. He was just he is a great partner, and I'm very fortunate to have my husband of over 30 years. So and a golden retriever that we adopted during during pandemic.
Of course, why would you not adopt a dog in the middle of the chaos? So, yeah, and then, so Kelly and I share a few things in common. Biologically, I am an only child, though I was raised with my cousin, who I always call my brother. And both of our dads died of mesothelioma, and both of our moms were young widows. And both of our moms decided that we would be the solution and the answer to all of their issues. So you're not only dealing with the 0300 dark, which I dark 300. How did you?
Oh, dark 30.
Oh, dark 30. Sorry. So you're also dealing with, you're a mom, you're a wife, you're a daughter, and everyone, you're the answer girl, I call it, right? So that puts an enormous amount of pressure on how you show up, and you still manage, as long as I've known you, to show up in a room and still light it up. So kudos to you to be able to be that chef, cook, bottle washer person, but at what cost, right? So what did you do? At what point did you realize this can't, well, I can't sustain this, and these are the things that I'm going to do differently as a result of my awareness now?
I have a great executive coach who I've worked with for many years who would always challenge me and said, what difficult conversation do you need to have, and who is it with that you've been putting off?" And she would always say that to me at the end of our calls. And I'm like, "Oh, okay." It could be my son, it could be my mother, it could be at work related, what could have been with one of my direct reports or my boss or my peers. But oftentimes it was my mother or my son. Um, so it would be my mother would, we created a system. I said, "Mom, I'm on the phone and video all day." I would always give myself a break from 12 to 1 to go walk the dog, have lunch, just re-engage with the household and see what's going on. And if there's any emergencies, if you need me, I'm available between 12 and 1. And then my goal was to be after 5. But inevitably, I would get a call at 10 in the morning or 3 in the afternoon, and I'd be like, "Can you hold 1 second?" I'm like, and I would answer the phone, "Mom, is this an emergency?" "No, but," and I'm like, "Okay, well, I'm going to call you back after 5 if it's not an emergency." So it's almost creating that, again, reminding, "Okay, everything's fine. I will call you back after my work day is over." But my mother thought because I worked at home, I really didn't do much. She thought that I would, doing online shopping or doing laundry or house cleaning. So she didn't associate. I wasn't going to an office, so she thought that I really had all day to talk to her, and she couldn't understand why. So after multiple phone calls, we had to sit down, and I said, "Mom, this is again." I actually wrote a kind of like instructions on her refrigerator and said, "In case of emergency, call Kelly anytime. If it is not emergency, call between 12 and 1 or after 5." Because she doesn't have a cell phone, can't text. So that's the other thing. She refuses to. And then my son would also sometimes barge in my office, so we'd have that typical conversation. So I got a little door hanger on my it says, "I'm on video. Please do not come in. The door will open once the meeting has concluded." But he would constantly, dive in the room. He was of 19 years old during the time, but again, couldn't quite read the door. But so we had to have a difficult conversation there. But I also had to have a difficult conversation with myself because my husband said, "You're burning the candle at both ends. You're working extremely long hours. It's very high pressure given the business and what's happening and how people needed to have the devices that Jabra had made during this time. And I was just exhausted and I was constantly working, and work felt normal. I'm sure it's like during when everything's around you is not normal, working like you always do, whether it's from your bedroom or wherever, felt normal. So I found myself working extra or going into my office. And so for me, it was taking the time in the morning, getting a different morning routine, getting up, drinking my water, taking the dog out for a sunrise walk or an early. We sometimes walk at 4 in the morning because that was the only time I could get out, and it was actually very peaceful out there. And I would leave my phone at home, and I would take that time just to look around me and hear the noise, just hear nature and just breathe and remind myself. And then at lunchtime, taking that extra walk and then fitting in exercise. Like it was, again, putting my oxygen mask on first before assisting the others around me. Because I felt it. I felt it in my body. I felt it in my weight. I wasn't moving. I was, eating because my husband was making bread. And certainly, I'd hear the wine opener going off at 5 o'clock. I'm like, oh, I hear wine. So I'm jumping downstairs to get that first glass of wine. And then we would do a puzzle or, watch Ozark or something. But I think, you feel it in your body and you just feel you can tell, and you can only go for so long at that frayed state. And then you realize I have to take time for me.
Totally. Yeah, I mean, that kind of flows into our next question because I think the listeners are like, this sounds like burnout. What does burnout look like? There's different variations of burnout. And so I wanted us to have a conversation. I did the same thing. I felt like the normalcy of the work was the way to escape from the crazy of the pandemic because it was known to us. It was the only thing we could control was our jobs or our, box, right? And so that was the only thing that was kind of consistent, even though it went from going 8, 10 hours to 10, 12, 14 hours. It felt like it was actually for us for a while because we were trying to help clients pivot to this new world of virtual or hybrid or whatever. They had no idea what to do. And all their systems were analog or whatever. Anyway, getting back to getting back to the subject at hand, it's like this idea of burnout, awareness, obviously, but burnout looks like I hate getting out of bed in the morning. I have a pit in my stomach. I am showing up tired all the time. Help the audience understand what it looks like.
You lose your passion. You dread things. You want to escape. I got COVID twice. The second time I got it, I actually think I wished it on myself because I was so exhausted. And I literally didn't leave my room because nobody in the house had COVID. So I left. I stayed in our primary suite. So my husband would leave food out there, or it was just me, and sometimes the dog would visit. So what did it look like? I binge watched Ted Lasso. I read books. I slept. I was so exhausted. I was sleeping 14 hours. I would wake up and I would be still tired. And I'm like, this isn't me. I'm like a 7-hour max sleeper. I would love to be a 12-hour again, like I was in high school sleeper, but that's not me. But I could feel it in my bones. I think I was borderline depressed, I'll be honest. And I didn't have the motivation. It was a struggle for me to even get on the phone and talk to loved ones or to be with them. So, I knew something wasn't right. But it's like, it's usually when you feel you recognize burnout, you're already in that stage. And it could look different for different people.
Yeah, and then the idea of taking on too much because of we don't know how to say no as women. I don't think we're that good at saying no so much. People pleaser kind of thing.
You don't want to, we inherently, especially if you're raised, I know you and I were raised in similar households, be seen and not heard, and you have to be perfect, and you don't say no, you don't throw a tantrum, you just sit quietly in the corner and you look the part and you can be the little hostess. And that's always what I was. I was never, people are like, how are you? I'm like, I'm great. And then they're like, well, you're the words say you're great, but I had dear friends that said, you're not great. I know that, I can see it in you. And someone recognized it in me and said they had a conversation with me at the end of 2023. And they said, you just looked exhausted. And that was like for me, they're like, they got, it was actually a coaching call. I was helping someone I was mentoring, and she stopped me and she's like, Kelly, you don't look like yourself. She's like, and she's like, what can I do to help? And I'm like, okay, that, it just, it's kind of like you look in and say, this isn't me and this isn't who I am. And then I had a call with her recently and she's like, you look fantastic. You look so happy. I can tell in your face, and just the difference in you and taking time for yourself. And I've literally taken the last 4 months. I was like, aren't you bored? And I'm like, no, I'm not bored at all.
No, because you're kind of interesting. So being with yourself is probably not a bad thing. The one comment I love when my mother used to say, "Better be alone than in bad company." And I thought, well, there's good. There's good advice. We should probably follow our own advice. What do we think? Why not? So now, as a what I call, what did we decide that we were going to call you a reformed corporate executive? How are you going to not allow a company to dictate you, your agenda, your life? Like, how are you gonna? What's going to happen that's different for you moving forward?
I watched a great TED Talk or podcast that Charlie Day, he's an actor, Always Sunny in Philadelphia. He was giving a college commencement last year, and he
Okay.
was talking about, he had all these, he was doing a different show at the time, and he was given a 1 year contract, but he was doing this other show on the side, Always Sunny, and he said, I got this great offer, but I didn't know how long it was going to last. And he said, I decided to take a bet on myself and do what I wanted to do, which was Always Sunny. He's like, oh, now I think they're 8 or 9 years in production seasons, and I think at this point in my career, I would love to take a bet on myself and think about what I do, that I'm intentional in where I'm spending my time and what I'm doing, and that I have the directive, that I'm orchestrating this, and I'm the conductor of my own life and my own career. So, this is what I'm contemplating now in my career pause. So I've given myself till the end of this year. So at the end of 2024, I'm calling it, you could call it my Eat, Pray, Love year. It's my self discovery year, where I'm really listening to things that get me excited or curious, things that I want to explore more. Looking at different educations, like, do I want to get an executive coaching certification? I love mentoring women and men in all stages of their career, and I learn from them. Hopefully, hopefully they're learning a lot from me. But I feel like I'm learning so much from them, and in their stories and their sharing with me. I mean, I just had a conversation with a woman that I've been mentoring for a while, and she is just like, I feel like I'm working all the time, and I'm like, well, how are you controlling your calendar? How are you protecting your calendar? And she said, I'm not. And I said, well, that's your first assignment. Go and block your calendar. Because she's like, well, I work best at this time. I said, then you should be blocking your calendar to do your strategy, do your project work, do the most important work that you need to show results, and don't let people take over that. And I had a great colleague who I've always admired, and he's just such a strong person who would never compromise. And I remember one time I said, I'm trying to book a meeting on your calendar and you're just booked. He's like, well, I'm preparing a very important presentation for the board. He said, I'm not accepting any meetings until after such and such a date. And I'm like, and I thought about that, because I think sometimes as women, we are like, someone wants a meeting, we want to accommodate them. But our time is so precious, and it's really important that we protect that and allow ourselves to, again, put our oxygen mask on, do our work that's most important first, versus helping someone else, complete their assignment.
Yeah. So I wanted to unpack that a little bit because you and I come from that exact same place when it comes to the calendar and blocking and protecting your nose to protect your yeses. And I said, I was just asked to be in a keynote recently, and we sat down, we did kind of like a fireside chat. And I said, there's a couple things wrong with the way women in general block their calendars. One is that we start our day with email. That is the kiss of death. That is the kiss of death. So, what you have done is you have given away your power and given away your time to somebody else's agenda. So, if you start to answer emails, first of all, you're in reactive mode right off the bat. And now you've just pissed away probably your most productive and like on like thought process slash energy slash, whatever we call it, your most creative time to answering bloody email. So here's what you're not going to be judged on your MBO, your review, your end of year analysis by your boss, your peers, your 360, whatever your company does. They're not going to judge how well you answer email. So let's talk about what is the secret sauce that Kelly, Monique, and whoever's listening brings to their careers that is unique to their skill set and them. That's the stuff you need to protect. That's the stuff that you calendar block and you save that time in your most productive time. If you're most productive in the afternoon, then block that. Turn off your notifications, turn off your phones, turn off your emails, and get to work on the shit you're going to be judged on. Because guess what? That's not the stuff you can delegate. So I went through a process and I said, okay, what can you delegate? What can be an email, not a meeting? What meeting can be a half an hour instead of an hour? What meeting doesn't even need to exist at all? And what meeting can be just a phone call in 10 minutes, we're done. These are all decisions that people piss away their time. Somebody blocks an hour and they accept it. I'm like, does this have to be an hour? Probably not. How about you stand? We all, and when we're in person, I say, everybody stand, right? And so if everybody's standing, nobody gets comfortable and goes for the donuts in the middle of the table. So let's bang it out. What do we got? Let's go. Let's go. So color blocking, standing, asking yourself what you can delegate, all those things are tools that you and I have talked about. I talk about it in the book, but for God's sake, women, do not give away your time to other people's agendas first. Yes, but ask questions, ask the follow-up, get the delegation, right? Like just concentrate on the Kelly stuff because maybe the other shit you're being asked to do, you could give it to your assistant. Maybe you could give it to your direct report. Maybe you could give it to a peer, or maybe you could tell the person to figure it out by themselves.
I always do the 3Ds. It's do it, defer it, delegate it.
Wait, masterclass, say it again.
Do it, defer it, delegate it.
I love that. Love that.
And I always say, before you do anything, ask yourself that question: do I need to do it? Can I delegate it, or can be deferred? I mean, another person, another amazing woman in tech, JJ DeGeronimo, she talks about how people would ask for her time, like, can you volunteer for this? Or, she has young kids and like, well, could you go do this or go do that? And she said, or someone would ask of her time. She's like, let me, and she would say it so politely, I'm going to need to get back to you. I need to check my schedule to ensure that I'm able to dedicate the time that you're asking for this. And I don't want to accept something knowing I won't be able to give you in return what you're looking for. And she said, I would give it always 1 to 2 weeks. And then generally by the time she went back to them and say, okay, I know you're asking for X, I can give you Y. And they'd be like, oh, don't worry, we've already got it covered. So she said half the time by again, but defer that response that, so many times as women, we said yes or accept that extra project. I was talking to some amazing women in China, and the culture there is they always say yes. And one of the women, I said, well, have you tried this strategy? And they said, oh, we cannot do that. I said, why don't you, before you say no, why don't you try? And it was amazing when this woman I was mentoring came back and she said, Kelly, thank you. And I'm like, great, it worked. Yes. So I think so many times people think that they need to accept it or that they need to agree to something and challenge. I'm like, I'm a big challenger. I'm a proponent of challenge. If at first I don't succeed, I come in and give a different pitch. I feel like I should have been a lawyer in another life.
Maybe you were.
I may have been, but I'm always coming back with a different angle, a different approach to try to get to yes. And if it's something I feel passionate about, I do not take no for an answer.
That in and of itself, people, listen to what Kelly is saying. You can hear the grit through your voice. You can hear the commitment to the yes if it means something to you. So again, you're being very intentional about, where you're going to go next in your next chapter. And I think that's what I want to talk about next. You're very clear now what you will and will not do, I think.
Yes.
And it sounds to me like you're okay with that.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that.
I had, we've been taking a lot of intentional walks. My husband and I, he's my greatest champion, my best friend, and a great sounding board. And so I always say, here's what he's not quick to to say, so it sounds like you're going to do this or are you going to do that. He lets me come to him in my time. And, when I said to him, I've made the decision and I just want, make sure you're supportive of it, that I'm going to take it until the end of the year. I've not given myself time off. This is a gift. And I want to accept that gift and I want to take and make the most of it. So, what do I want to do during my time? I went on a trip with my best friends, and he and I are planning a trip for next fall. We're still not sure where yet. Um, well, that's still to be announced. So there's a couple things we're looking at. Could be Italy. Could it be back to Aruba? Could it be something completely different?
Or both.
Or exactly, or all the above. I want it. I want 4 days by myself somewhere. I don't even care where that is. It could be in my house, but I'm like, I haven't had 4 days by myself in probably ever, or maybe since I was younger. And so I said, I want to give that to myself, time for me. So it's really, it's about my goals, short term and long term, and I'm just learning who I am through conversations with great connections like you, Monique, and others, and reading and furthering my education, and just like having these what if conversations. What if I didn't do that? Or what if I choose this? Or what if I take a year and don't go back to whatever position I'm going to be next, and then making peace with that. And I see so many women, especially, who make a decision, but then, well, they kind of backtrack or kind of wobble on it, and then they go back and forth. But making that commitment and really, being proud of that commitment, and just living the dream. Why not? If not now, if as Marv Levy would say, if not now, or there's no place I'd rather be than right here, right now. And I'm in the greatest. I think this is the best I've ever felt.
That's really awesome to hear that. It's amazing. I think, well, that's just a master class in sort of intentionality and being comfortable with who you are. I think the one thing we didn't unpack, and I want to do that for, we have a lot of executives and women who have or very career oriented, and I applaud that. I'm all about it. And simultaneous to that, we typically may encounter ego around where we've been and what we've done. And as somebody who came from corporate America and left it and now is certifiably unemployable, as I refer to myself, I had ego around, oh my God, I was something. I wasn't a VIP. People kissed my ass. People wanted my time. People were, like you had an entourage, you had a team, you had people reporting to you, you had, it was all over the place. So there's a little bit of that. And then when you step off and you become just I do it intentionally. I say just a vendor. You go from the important client to just the vendor. It's a slap in the face initially until you find your sea legs. So I just wanted to have you tell the audience kind of your perspective on letting go of the ego, because ultimately there's for me, there was light at the end of the tunnel and there was enormous joy once I went through the initial pain. But I want you to address the ego factor that we all have, and no one talks about it.
No, you're 100% right. When I left the company that I'd worked for almost 8 years, I said I was a walking Brene Brown book. It was about shame, blame, ego, and I did. So many said that they associated me, or I associated me with president, general manager, leading this giant organization, and this was the culmination of many years of climbing up that ladder. And it does, you take a minute to say, well, who am I? And that's why I think so many, it's like yes, you are this person, this is your role, but that is not who you are. That is your daily, that's what you do. And I would say work is what you do, it is not your life. And unfortunately, so many that I talk to, work becomes their life. And I see that when you get out of balance, and there's no such thing as a work life balance. It's a teeter totter, right? There's always one that's going to be requiring a little bit more. It's more integration. It's like, how does your work integrate with your life? Because at the end of the day, I've seen. I mean, at my age, I've seen my husband's cousin just passed away 2 years ago of a heart attack, 54 years old. I'm like, do I want to be at this age where, my at the end of people come to my we actually had a conversation about this in my girls trip. What's the song that you want played at your funeral? And what do you want your legacy to be? And what will people say? I actually wrote my obituary. And I kept writing about work and what I did and what I did, and not who I am and my impact to so many that I know I've impacted, whether it's through mentoring or coaching or leading, and just being a friend and a neighbor, and my son's mother and friend, mother to all of his friends, and that's what I want to be remembered for. And I think that's what makes you take a step back and say, because you realize you have to see sometimes. I wouldn't separate the two. Like, work would just take over and I would let it. And I don't want that to happen, and I don't want that for others. I think you have to have that semblance of, yes, people leave jobs, whether it's by their choice or the company's choice, and you learn something along the way. I have so many that are lost, or like, I need to go back and go do something, and then they rush into something that might not be the right thing because of ego, or I get something with that title, I get something, even if they hate it or they work for a company that's just horrible. And I'm not saying the company I work with is not a horrible company, but I'm talking to others who worked for a company where it was, no matter what they did, they were tolerated, not celebrated. And I said, okay, you need to take a step back and think about what you want and what works within your life integration, and take a role. And it maybe you take something that's 1 year or 6 months even, and or it's, I'm going to take this for 1 to 2 years. A great mentor and sponsor of mine, we call him the Godfather. His name is Peter Gambino, and he's a great man. And he was a sponsor and a boss of mine who really, I have a lot to thank for. And he's still probably the second or third person I call when anything good or bad happens in my life. He's retired now, and Peter would say, "Don't be afraid," and he would always, give me such great advice. And he'd say things like, "Kelly, whenever I'm somewhere, I reevaluate every year. Sometimes it's every 6 months, and say, is this affording me the life that my family and I want? Is it giving me a good balance? Do I feel recognized and heard and celebrated? And you know what? And if that's all, if it checks all the boxes, and he's happy, he's like, I'm going to sign up for another 6 months, a year. And he would actually evaluate every year. And I took that to heart. And when I left Ingram Micro after almost 19 years, I went to go work for another company, and it was great. The first year was fantastic, and the second year was difficult. And I'm like, they're changing direction. Some of the things that this company is striving for don't align with my beliefs. So I think it's time for me to go look elsewhere, and to go somewhere for 1.5, 2 years was unheard of back then. My mother's like, you need to work for one company for the rest of your life and from there. But I think I learned something in that it's okay to sign up for what works for you at that time, and then to say no thank you when it doesn't serve you in the right way.
Perfect. That's great advice. Thank you. Yeah, I think that writing the obituary. I don't know if I'm the one that mentioned that to you. Like when I first met you, I was like, oh yeah, you know what? I'm going to reverse engineer my life. And part of my coaching that I do with especially executive women is write your obit, and you're going to see it.
I did mine when I was on vacation, so that's what I did.
But it's funny. The Europeans have it right. When you meet Europeans, generally speaking, it takes you a while to know what they do for a living because that's not what they lead with. They don't lead with that. It's like I remember there was a comedian, I don't remember who the comedian was, but it was like, I'm meeting all these, and he does the French person, which is sort of funny. He goes, so what do you do? Well, what do you mean? I like to read the books, I like to eat, I like to drink the wine. What do you mean? What do I do? Like, I do not understand the question. So it was this idea of we associate who we are with what we do, what brings in a paycheck. Whereas they look at like, what is it that you bring to the world and what are you up to? And that I think is why I so much enjoy being around Europeans because they have a much more balanced view of life.
And they have more vacation time too. I mean, that's the other piece. It's like, that was one thing I learned working for a European company. I'm like, wait a minute, I could take 3 weeks off and that's celebrated. I'm like, I think there was a time where I don't think I ever took. I think one time I took 2 weeks and I thought, oh my gosh, like this is a life changing. And then I took 3 weeks and I'm like, wait, this is an option, this is a choice.
4 to 5, sometimes 6, depending on what level you're at. But, so it's this idea that, we wanna look at other things other than the pay grade, the level, the title, and the industry. I had lunch with somebody who was just let go from a company that she's been at for 17 years. She was SVP, and she has not gotten to that, like, let go of the ego thing yet. So I was coaching her through some of the things that she might wanna be thinking about, which you just articulated so beautifully. And so I think you're at that point in your journey where you're able to disconnect, be objective, and share your learning, which is huge, with other people. And for that, we thank you. We thank you for being authentic and vulnerable and real. And that's why I love you, Kelly Nagel. Stay tuned, guys. Thank you for being here for Possibilities. And I hope that you have heard Kelly and creating your own possibilities. Make it a great day, people. Bye bye. Thank you so much for listening to Possibilities with Monique DeMeo, where we unpack life as a female mover and shaker. If you like the show, please consider liking it, or better still, subscribing to it and leaving us a rating. It truly does help. Also, you can pick up my book, The 7 Secrets to Creating a Life You Love, a practical guide for women in leadership. You can find the book, other episodes of this podcast, and how to stay in touch at moniquedemeo.com. DEMAIO. I look forward to seeing you again soon. With gratitude, Monique.